March 8, 1944. 23,000 feet over Dummer Lake, Germany. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson is running out of sky. His P-47D Thunderbolt is at full military power. The Pratt & Whitney R-2800 is screaming at 2,700 RPM, and the Focke-Wulf 190 behind him is still closing. Johnson's airspeed indicator reads 380 miles per hour. The German is faster. Johnson has maybe 40 seconds before cannon rounds start punching through his fuselage. Then he remembers the toggle switch. The one they told him not to touch unless he had no other choice. The one connected to a system that didn't exist 6 months ago. A system built because a mechanic at Republic Aviation got tired of watching American pilots die. Johnson flips the switch. Water and methanol flood into his engine's supercharger. The R-2800 surges from 2,000 horsepower to 2,535. His Thunderbolt leaps forward like someone kicked it in the tail. The Focke-Wulf falls behind. This is the story of how desperation, ingenuity, and 30 gallons of water changed the air war over Europe. To understand what happened, you need to understand 1943. The 8th Air Force is bleeding. American bombers are flying daylight raids deep into Germany without fighter escort. The P-47 Thunderbolt, America's primary long-range fighter, has a combat radius of about 230 miles. Berlin is 600 miles from England. The math doesn't work. When P-47s turn back at the limit of their range, German fighters swarm the bomber formations. On October 14, 1943, the second Schweinfurt raid, 60 B-17s are shot down, 600 men killed or captured in a single afternoon. But range isn't the only problem. At high altitude, above 25,000 feet, the P-47 can outrun anything the Luftwaffe puts in the sky. The turbo-supercharged R-2800 maintains power where other engines gasp for thin air. Below 20,000 feet, the situation reverses. The Focke-Wulf 190 generates 1,700 horsepower at sea level. The P-47 generates about 2,000. That sounds like an advantage until you realize the FW-190 weighs 9,700 pounds loaded. The P-47 weighs 17,500 pounds. Pound for pound, the German fighter accelerates faster, climbs better, and turns tighter at low and medium altitudes. And low altitude is where most dogfights end up. Combat bleeds energy. Planes descend. German pilots know this. They force fights lower, where their aircraft have the edge. Republic Aviation knows American pilots are dying because of physics they can't overcome. They need more power. Not a little more, dramatically more. The kind of power boost that shouldn't be possible from an engine already running at its limits. The concept isn't new. In 1930, a British engineer named Harry Ricardo published research on water injection for internal combustion engines. The principle is simple. Inject water into an engine's intake charge, and the water absorbs heat as it evaporates. Cooler intake temperatures mean denser air. Denser air means more oxygen. More oxygen means you can burn more fuel. More fuel, more power. The Germans understood this. By 1943, they're already using a system called MW-50, methanol wasser, on their Bf-109 fighters. 50% methanol, 50% water, injected directly into the supercharger. It gives them an emergency power boost of roughly 10 to 15% for short periods. British intelligence knows about MW-50. American engineers know about it too. But adapting the concept to the R-2800 is a different engineering challenge entirely. The R-2800 is a twin-row, 18-cylinder radial engine. It's already one of the most complex power plants in the war. Adding a water injection system means redesigning the intake manifold, the supercharger housing, the fuel delivery system. It means months of testing. It means production delays, when production delays cost lives. Republic's engineering department estimates 18 months to develop and certify a water injection system. Pilots don't have 18 months. Enter a group of men whose names mostly didn't make it into the official histories. The engineers and mechanics at Republic's Farmingdale plant who started experimenting on their own time, who scrounged parts and ran unauthorized tests after their shifts ended, who understood that the men flying these aircraft needed help now, not in 18 months. One name does survive in the records: Joe Curtis, a flight test engineer who championed the water injection program internally. But he wasn't alone. The project was collaborative, urgent, and technically against corporate policy. They called their creation the water injection system in official documents. On the factory floor, they called it something else. They called it the panic button. The system they developed was elegantly brutal. A 15-gallon tank mounted behind the pilot's seat. Later versions would expand to 30 gallons. The tank contained a mixture of water and methanol, usually about 50-50, though ratios varied based on testing results and available supplies. From the tank, a high-pressure line ran forward to the supercharger inlet. When the pilot activated the system, an electric pump forced the mixture into the engine's throat at approximately 300 pounds per square inch. The effect was dramatic. Normal military power on the R-2800-21 produced about 2,000 horsepower. With water injection engaged, that figure jumped to approximately 2,300 horsepower in early tests. Later refinements pushed it to 2,535, a 27% increase. 27% doesn't sound revolutionary until you understand what it means in a dogfight. A P-47 that previously needed 8 minutes to climb from 15,000 to 25,000 feet could now do it in under 6 minutes. Top speed at 25,000 feet increased from 433 miles per hour to 460 miles per hour. Acceleration improved across the entire flight envelope. But there were limits. Water injection couldn't run continuously. The cooling effect was temporary. Run it too long, and the engine would overheat once the water ran out. The system was designed for emergency use only, maximum 5 minutes of continuous operation. 5 minutes doesn't sound like much. In aerial combat, 5 minutes is a lifetime. The engine also needed to be at full military power before water injection would function safely. Engage it at low throttle settings, and the sudden power surge could damage internal components. Pilots had to learn when to use it and when to hold back. Republic's test pilots ran the system through hundreds of hours of evaluation. They discovered something unexpected. The methanol in the mixture wasn't just preventing the water from freezing at altitude, it was adding power of its own. Methanol is a fuel. When it vaporized in the supercharger, some of it combusted in the cylinders along with the aviation gasoline. This added roughly 5% more power on top of the cooling benefit. The Germans had discovered the same thing. With MW-50, American engineers had reached the same conclusion. If you enjoyed this story so far, please hit that like button. It helps us share these forgotten engineering breakthroughs with more people who appreciate them. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. Back to the water injection story. The first water injection-equipped P-47s reached combat units in England in January 1944. They went to the 56th Fighter Group first, commanded by Colonel Hubert Zemke. Zemke's group had been flying P-47s since April 1943. They knew the aircraft's limitations intimately. They'd lost friends to those limitations. The pilots were briefed on the new system with enthusiasm and caution. The enthusiasm came from the performance numbers. The caution came from the unknowns. Nobody had tested water injection in actual combat. Laboratory conditions and combat conditions are universes. Would the system work when a pilot was pulling 5 Gs with a Messerschmitt on his tail? Would it work at 30 below zero? Would it work with battle damage to the aircraft? The only way to find out was to fight. Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, the pilot from our opening, was among the first to use water injection in combat. His account, recorded after the war, describes the moment with characteristic understatement. I knew I was out of options. The 190 was closing, and I couldn't outrun him at that altitude. I hit the water injection and felt the plane surge forward. It was like someone had strapped a rocket to the tail. The German pilot must have thought his eyes were lying to him. Johnson survived the war with 28 confirmed aerial victories. He credited water injection with saving his life at least 3 times.
But Johnson was an exceptional pilot. The real test was whether average pilots could use the system effectively. By spring 1944, water injection was standard on all P-47D models being shipped to combat theaters. The tactical implications took time to filter through to German pilots. For weeks, they continued using the same tactics that had worked against earlier Thunderbolts. Dive on the P-47s, force them low, use the FW-190's superior low-altitude performance to gain advantage. Then they started dying. P-47s that should have been easy prey were suddenly outrunning their attackers. German pilots reported engagements where American fighters accelerated away from point-blank gun range with inexplicable speed. Captured Luftwaffe documents from mid-1944 show growing concern about enhanced performance American fighters. German intelligence initially believed the Americans had fielded a completely new aircraft type. When they learned the truth, that it was the same P-47 with a tank of water and methanol, the response was disbelief. One German pilot's combat report, translated after the war, reads, "I closed to 200 meters on the American. He was at full throttle, no evasive action. I was certain of the kill. Then his aircraft accelerated as if fired from a cannon. I could not follow. I have never seen this from a Thunderbolt before." The Germans had their own water injection systems, but their industrial capacity was collapsing under Allied bombing. MW-50 installations couldn't be manufactured fast enough to equip frontline units consistently. American factories, untouched by enemy bombs, could produce water injection systems by the thousands. By summer 1944, the performance gap that had favored German fighters at low altitude had narrowed dramatically. In some scenarios, it had reversed completely. The numbers tell the story. In the first quarter of 1944, before water injection reached most combat units, the 8th Air Force lost approximately 1,100 heavy bombers over Germany. Fighter escort, including P-47s, couldn't prevent the slaughter. In the second quarter of 1944, with water injection-equipped P-47s and the new P-51 Mustangs providing escort, bomber losses dropped to around 800, despite a dramatic increase in mission tempo. The third quarter saw losses fall further to approximately 600 bombers, even as the 8th Air Force flew deeper into Germany than ever before. Water injection wasn't the only factor. P-51 Mustangs, with their superior range, were now escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back. German pilot quality was declining as experienced aviators were killed faster than replacements could be trained. Fuel shortages grounded Luftwaffe fighters for training flights. But water injection was a multiplier. It made every P-47 more survivable. It gave pilots options they didn't have before. It turned defensive engagements into offensive ones. The 56th Fighter Group, flying water injection-equipped P-47s exclusively, finished the war with 674.5 confirmed aerial victories, the highest total of any American fighter group in the European theater. They lost 128 pilots killed in action. That's a kill ratio of better than 5-to-1. Those numbers represent real men who came home because their aircraft could outrun the enemy when nothing else would save them. Water injection proved equally critical in the Pacific, though under different circumstances. Pacific P-47s faced Japanese fighters that were generally lighter and more maneuverable than their aircraft. The K-84 Hayate, which Allied pilots called Frank, could outclimb and outturn a Thunderbolt in almost any configuration. But the K-84 couldn't match a water injection-equipped P-47 in a straight-line dash. Pacific pilots developed tactics specifically around this capability. Engage from altitude, make one diving pass. If you miss, use water injection to extend away before the Japanese fighters can respond. Reset, Repeat. Tropical conditions created unique challenges for the water injection system. High humidity and salt air corroded components faster than in Europe. Ground crews in the Pacific spent additional maintenance hours keeping the systems functional. One crew chief from the 348th Fighter Group, stationed in the Philippines, wrote home in late 1944, "The tanks rust out if you look at them wrong. We're replacing lines every other week, but the pilots won't fly without it. They say it's saved too many lives to give up." The Pacific campaign continued through August 1945. Water injection-equipped P-47s flew combat missions until the final day of the war. The war ended. Jets arrived. The piston-engine fighter became obsolete almost overnight. But water injection didn't disappear. The principles survived into the jet age. Early jet engines, like the piston engines before them, could benefit from water injection during takeoff when maximum thrust was required. Military transports used it well into the 1960s. Some civilian aircraft used it even longer. Today, water-methanol injection is common in high-performance automotive applications. Turbocharged racing engines use systems that would be recognizable to Republic's engineers from 1943. The chemistry is identical. The engineering principles haven't changed. Drag racers, rally cars, street performance vehicles, all of them trace their water injection lineage back to that Farmingdale factory where mechanics worked after hours to solve a problem nobody had authorized them to solve. The men who developed the P-47's water injection system mostly didn't receive medals. They weren't shooting down German fighters. They weren't flying through flak over Berlin. They were engineers and mechanics, working with wrenches and blueprints instead of guns and bombs. But their contribution mattered. Every pilot who survived because his engine could produce that extra 500 horsepower for 5 critical minutes owes something to those men. Every bomber crewman who made it home because the escort fighters could stay with the formation a little longer owes something to those men. Engineering doesn't produce heroes in the traditional sense. There are no Medal of Honor recipients for designing engine modifications, no parades for the mechanics who kept the systems running. But there should be. If you visit the National Air and Space Museum's Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center near Washington, D.C., you'll find a P-47D Thunderbolt on display. It's a water injection-equipped variant, one of the later production models with the bubble canopy and the 30-gallon tank. The placard mentions water injection in passing, a single sentence about increased engine power. Most visitors walk by without stopping. They're headed for the Space Shuttle Discovery or the SR-31 Blackbird. The P-47 is just another World War II fighter, one of thousands that survived. But look closer. Look at the small access panel behind the cockpit where the water tank was mounted. Look at the lines that once carried the methanol mixture forward to the supercharger. Look at the toggle switch in the cockpit, still there after 80 years, still connected to nothing. That switch meant 5 more minutes, 5 minutes of power that shouldn't have been possible, 5 minutes that made the difference between coming home and not coming home. The men who flew these aircraft are almost gone now. The men who built them are gone. The factories that produced water injection systems have been demolished or converted to other uses. But the story survives. Desperation produces innovation. Mechanics and engineers, working without authorization, solved a problem that should have taken 18 months in a fraction of that time. They did it because pilots were dying. They did it because they could. They did it because that's what Americans do when the situation demands it. The next time you hear a turbocharged engine spool up on a modern sports car, remember where that technology came from. Remember the 56th Fighter Group over Germany. Remember Robert Johnson flipping a toggle switch with a Focke-Wulf on his tail. Remember the nameless mechanics at Farmingdale who worked after hours because waiting wasn't an option. Remember the panic button. If this story meant something to you, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to share these engineering stories with more viewers who appreciate them. Subscribe and hit the notification bell. We cover forgotten innovations every week. The machines that won wars, the people who built them, the stories that deserve to be remembered. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We've got viewers from every allied nation and quite a few of the former Axis powers, too. History belongs to everyone now. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for caring about the engineers and mechanics whose names never made the history books. They deserve better. You're helping that happen.